2008, Kosovo unilaterally declared its independence from Serbia. 10 years later, the parliament in Pristina has voted to transform the lightly armed Kosovo Security Force into a standing army. This decision has enraged its neighbor Serbia. What's behind Kosovo's move? What's the nature of the relationship between Serbia and Kosovo? And how will the Balkans' hard-won peace and stability be affected? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Jiang Shixue from the Institute of Global Studies at Shanghai University and Anna Tangen, author and columnist. We shall also speak via satellite to Pavel Falkenhorst, defense analyst in Moscow. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. First of all, Anna, what do you think of the timing of the decision by Kosovo to declare that they're going to transform the security force into a regular standing army?
I think it's very bad timing. I mean, the world has enough problems with the economic situation, with tariffs, with Italy, with Brexit, with wars in the Middle East, with things going on in Asia. I just don't see what this is going to do. They had just recently turned down this, proposed this idea that they trade one of their provinces, that is in Serbia, be given to them without making a counter that they would exchange a province which has mostly Serbians in it. So it's baffling exactly what it is. But what's even more baffling is why the United States and Great Britain are supporting this over the objections of NATO.
It seems we don't have a single voice coming out of NATO at this moment about the transformation of the security force. Mr. Jiang, this is the 10th anniversary for Kosovo's independence. Now, of course, it's a moment to celebrate their independence one way or another, but were you surprised by their dramatic decision to transform the security force into a standing army?
Well, I would say yes and no. As you know, so far, still many countries have not recognized the so-called Kosovo independence. About 120, less than 120 countries have recognized its independence. And Kosovo wants to finish the whole process of the so-called state building. And its leaders say, without a kind of a standing army, we cannot say we are formally a 100% sovereign nation. And not long ago, Kosovo wants to become a member of the Organization for the International Police, Interpol, and its application was declined. So I believe that Kosovo wants to make some kind of big headline news so that it will attract international attention from around the world. But we cannot forget the U.S., as our colleague mentioned the U.S. just now. Trump said, well, we can sit and talk. So I don't know whether we are going to see a second David Camp. Jimmy Carter did a good job in pushing forward the peace process in the Middle East. So, well, from the heart, I really do hope that Trump can push forward this kind of process, but I doubt it.
It goes without saying that having a regular army is a part of the symbolic gesture to fully establish the legitimacy of a country's independence as a sovereign state. Let me go to what I did a few years ago, an exclusive interview with the former foreign minister of Serbia, and see how he commented on Kosovo and the relationship between Kosovo and Serbia. Let's take a quick look. Not many of our viewers are able to understand what Kosovo really means for Serbia. According to what we have read, it's culturally, religiously, and historically very important for Serbia, just like what Shanxi province means for the mainland of the People's Republic of China.
This is actually very true. Kosovo's got a very special historical,
how special is that?
And religious meaning. Well, if one wants to make a comparison, this is one very good comparison that you made, but another good comparison would be probably to relate it to the importance of Jerusalem, say to the state of Israel. So it is actually very important, because this was the birthplace of our culture. This was the birthplace of our religion. This was the birthplace of our statehood. And as such, it's got a very, very special meaning in hearts of all the citizens of Serbia.
Well, that interview was, of course, very impressive for at least one reason. Kosovo is culturally so important for the sovereignty and historical memories of the Serbs. Now let me go back to Pavel, a Russian analyst who's standing by in Moscow, because Russia has been an ally of Serbs in the past, at present, and I believe in the future. So it comes as no surprise that the Russians would present this strong voice in shaping the future of not only Kosovo, but above all, the future of the standing army. Pavel, what do you make of this dramatic decision that surprised so many NATO leaders and politicians of the European Union? Pavel?
Well, for Russia, the Balkans were very important in the 90s when the Balkan wars were raging. And the Balkans, and Kosovo in particular, was the first place, the first incident when, after the end of the Cold War, Russia seriously clashed with the West. And that was before President Vladimir Putin came to power. Since then, the Balkans have become less important. Already in 2003, Putin removed all Russian forces, all troops, from peacekeeping and other missions in the Balkans against Serbian protestations. And of course, the Balkans are important, but much lesser in the broader picture. For Russia, it's mostly to prevent NATO expansion as far as possible. Serbia is important because Serbs say that they won't join NATO. They didn't join anti-Russian sanctions connected to Crimea, and the Serbs turn to Russia when they get into some kind of trouble. But the problem is, traditionally, already for more than 100 years, economically in peacetime, Europe, and especially Germany, are much more important to Serbia than Russia. So it's a kind of relationship that's on when Serbia is in bad position, off when it's peaceful there. And so the Russians will support, of course, Serbia. Russia has protested the creation of this Kosovo army, though basically everyone understands that this is more of a rebranding. I mean, it's the same the security forces that existed before, but now they'll be called an army. It doesn't really mean that the Kosovo are building, Albanians in Kosovo are building a real armed force to begin some kind of offensive action. So right now, it's more posturing on all sides. And of course, it's very important internally for the Albanians, for the Serbs. So mostly the politics there are moved by national feeling, by internal politics. And the outside world is right now more occupied with Syria, Ukraine, other issues, and not Korea, and not with the Balkans, as long as things there are more or less okay. I mean, no one is killing anyone.
Pavel, many historians and students of history are awash with the bitter memories about how the First World War had broken out in the Balkan region. And by the way, Balkanization is a very important concept in the vocabulary of international politics. Today, politicians in Belgrade threaten to use force as one of the viable options on the table to sort it out. Now, to what degree do you think we're going to have the likelihood that hostilities might break out between Serbs and Kosovo, which is populated mostly by Albanians?
Well, yes, there has been a lot of hot talk on both sides, from Pristina and from Belgrade. But the present Serbian leadership understands that it doesn't have a military option and doesn't really consider it as seriously. And they've more or less resigned right now that they lost Kosovo forever, and nothing can be done about that. And yes, they have been mobilizing their forces, threatening to do something, but that is basically posturing. While NATO forces, KFOR, is still in place, And no, the Serbian leadership are not right now not extreme nationalists at all, though of course they have to play the nationalist card. So no, there's no real threat of a real big war, though clashes, some kind of small clashes could occur. But the resumption of the Balkan Wars right now is impossible, as it was in the 90s. I mean, that's not coming back.
Well, Pavel has easily dismissed the possibility of having a war between Kosovo and Serbia, which somehow led to the ouster of Slobodan Milosevic from the position of presidency, and he ended up being imprisoned in The Hague, and he died there, of course, behind the bars. Now let's look at the future of Kosovo. The economy has been in poor shape. Unemployment rate stands at a very high level. The most impoverished part of Europe, I believe, would have to rely on economic assistance from the neighboring economy. So what do you think of the relationship between the European Union and Kosovo? We won't have a war, by the way, but can I have your thoughts on the prospects?
Well, I would say for Serbia, I think it wishes that this kind of deadlock can be dealt with in a peaceful way, because Serbia wants to join the European Union. And according to the rules of the EU, any country who has troubles with its neighbor cannot be a member of the European Union. So it's
therefore Turkey has been rejected.
So it's for the interests of Serbia to deal with this kind of possible issues. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, that its economy is terrible. Yes, heavy fighting 20 years ago, so it's not easy to get over this kind of difficulty, the so-called leftovers of the wartime 20 years ago. But its strategic position is very important. So that's why there is a fierce competition among the major powers, the US, Russia, European Union, and sometimes even Turkey, Germany, all kinds of things. So I would say the near future prospect would not be so promising. So I would say these politicians should have the clever minds or clever political wisdom to deal with this deadlock, which has been lasting for so long.
President Trump called the politicians in both Belgrade and Pristina to hopefully introduce a dialogue between the two sides as part of the process of rapprochement building. But what do you make of the inconsistent voices coming out of NATO, with the Secretary General Stoltenberg calling for leaders in Kosovo to reconsider their decision of transforming the security force, but with important members of the NATO, such as Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States, calling for recognition of the regular army? We see the discrepancies here. What do you make of such differences?
Well, it's really a bit disconcerting, because when you have NATO openly against itself, I mean, this should be decided behind closed doors. This isn't something you should be bringing out. Why Great Britain right now, which in the midst of Brexit is considering adding, oil to the fire in the Balkans, is beyond me. Yes, it's just it's a rebranding. But, getting Donald Trump involved because he thinks that he can create a new Camp David Accord or something like that, he just doesn't strike me as the person who's bringing people together right now. So,
are you suggesting that whatever President Donald Trump says in his foreign policy formulation would be an effort to divert public attention from internal woes to the alleged external threats, to arouse support from his electorate, and to reshape the agenda of domestic politics?
I think that would be a very fair assessment.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, he's looking for an opportunity offshore to do something. We already saw him, fly to Afghanistan and parade amongst the troops and things like this. But this is not, Iraq. This is the kind of thing that he's looking for. He's combing through what he perceives could be an easy win. But this is not. I agree with both of you. Pavel says, yeah, no one wants to do a war here, the big powers. All right, and this is a country that is mired in all sorts of problems. They do have resources. but it's a very small country. It's landlocked. It's very dependent on others, and it can't join NATO. So the theory has been all along that there's two provinces, one in Serbia that's predominantly Azerbaijani, and the other, Albanian, and another one which is in Kosovo, which is predominantly Serb. Logically, it would make sense to swap these. This has been on the table for 10 years. It has gone nowhere. And instead of coming across as reasonable, all of a sudden you're saying, oh, let's have a force, we'll be an army, and that will make all the difference.
But probably if we do this kind of a swap for this kind of territories, but on the so-called negative side, there is a possibility that there will be a domino effect, because in this the Balkan areas, so many countries are suffering from ethnic problems. So if you can swap this kind of land for peace, then other countries in the Balkan area might do the same, and there will be trouble.
Yeah. I should also mention, I don't know that Russia is going to be in favor of this kind of swap, because that would clear the way for Kosovo to join NATO, and that is not something that's going to be in their long-term plan.
Pavel, what do you think of the inconsistent voices in the NATO?
Well, yes, this doesn't sound good for NATO at all. Of course, different countries in NATO have different opinions, and most likely the Secretary General right now is at a loss because he has to represent the entirety of NATO. And there's Spain that didn't recognize Kosovo and doesn't want to recognize Kosovo because of Catalonia problems. And so, I mean, NATO does not have a single, unified position at all on this Kosovo problem. And this is reflected by these inconsistent statements. But of course, everyone understands that this is not the 90s. This is not a war situation. That means you can posture. So the West postures, the locals posture. In the end, there's a lot of huffing and puffing, but hopefully there will be no big wars. Everyone understands that Brussels, the European Union, holds the strings of the purse on which Kosovo exists, and which Serbia needs, and which all the other Balkan nations need to continue and to develop and to kind of crawl out of that hole that they got in the 90s in the wars of the breakup of Yugoslavia. And that's the situation as it is right now. And hopefully this is not going to be the main problem of the future. There's no more shooting in Sarajevo that will put the entire continent on flames. If there will be some kind of shooting of such sorts, it would be maybe some other place, but not in Sarajevo or in general in the Balkans.
Given the trust deficit between the United States and Russia, and between the United States and the PRC, when politicians of Serbia call for a dialogue that involves Moscow and Beijing, is it likely that President Trump will accept this proposal, Pavel?
Maybe he will, actually. Maybe he believes that these Balkan problems are just easy to solve. He had, Trump and the art of the deal thing, but they're not. I mean, these are problems of neighboring communities that have been at each other's throats for over 500 years. And right now, outside powers have imposed a kind of a curfew on the Balkans. But that lasts as long as an outside imperial force, like right now the European Union, imposes peace on these nations. If this gets weaker and by some kind of something happens and the outside force pressing them to be peaceful gets weaker, they'll be at each other's throats again. That's almost indispensable. That's how it happens there.
Thank you so much, Pavel. Mr. Jiang, Camp Bomb Steel is the largest U.S. military base in Kosovo. Earlier you mentioned the strategic location and its importance of Kosovo in the Balkan region. Now, with this context in your mind, what do you make of the suggestion by President Donald Trump to encourage the two sides, Serbia and Kosovo, to have a dialogue which allegedly will involve Moscow, despite the dislike and dismay of the White House?
Well, as you know, that it's not strange to see that the U.S. has military base in Kosovo, because this is a very important strategic place, and the U.S. has military bases all over the world. Wherever there is sunshine, there is a military base for the U.S. Well, whether or not Trump will invite these two persons to come to the U.S. to have a dialogue, it's everybody's guess. Personally, I would assume that probably there should be some kind of informal talk or dialogue among the three, or probably 4 or 5, who knows. I'm not sure whether China is interested in doing some kind of mediation job for this kind of crisis, because China has never recognized Kosovo's independence, and Russia is on the side of Serbia. So you can see there's a quite a strange situation over there. So I really don't know. I hope this kind of crisis can be dealt with in a very nice way, accepted by everybody.
Just out of strong curiosity, Anna, what are the reasons why Serbia fails to be accepted by the European Union, despite the marathon-like negotiations between the two sides, since perhaps the end of the Balkan-Herzegovina war, Bosnia-Herzegovina war?
Well, as Pavel pointed out, it's not complete alienation. They're still getting money from the EU and that type of support and things like that. There's been basically an economic lid put on this whole area in order to keep things at a somewhat low boil, prevent things from exploding. But the issue is really the ethnic cleansing, the campaign, which has showed 800,000 Kosovo refugees in these camps, children, women, etc., the bombings and everything like that. This has left a kind of indelible mark. This was a kind of villainization. Now, obviously, Milosevic was doing some very, very terrible things, but he was brought to justice, and at this point, you have a much more moderate group in there. The question is, how do you solve these things? Everyone thought that somehow Kosovo would solve everything, but as you kick the can down the road, you find that the can is still there when you get it. So this is the difficulty things. You have big backers on all sides who are doing different things. They have different strategies. It's not a boiling point. It's not a flash point. I would agree with Pavel on that. But it's going to be a continuing piece of irritation amongst great powers and amongst the Balkans.
Pavel, let me get back to Pavel. What do you think of the difficulties that Serbia faces in applying for the membership of the European Union?
Well, European membership all Serbs more or less support that. Only maybe some fringe nationalists are against it. So yes, that's basically the European Union will be more or less also would want to have Serbia in, but there are serious problems, and Kosovo is one of them. The present moderate Serbian leadership would want this maybe Kosovo thing to go away, but it won't. And they have an internal population, they have nationalistic feelings there that you can't ever fully kind of legally write Kosovo off, because even if there's this kind of deal of exchanging Kosovo Mitrovica for a piece of southern Serbia and exchanging populations, that would involve in the end Serbia recognizing Kosovo independence. And right now, no one in Serbia, no political force can actually legally recognize. De facto, yes, but legally, no. And that means that you're going to be all the time returning to the same thing. You're going to have Serbian nationalism, Kosovan, Albanian nationalism, and then there's the Albanian minority in neighboring Macedonia, and there's of course the other Albania, and this whole problem doesn't go away. It doesn't go away with economic development and with economic aid coming from Brussels. What was hoped 20 years ago, that when the fighting ends and people begin to live and prosper, that they'll become all friends. Well, they're not becoming all friends, and the problems are not going away just by European membership.
Pavel, I'm surprised that you stopped short of mentioning the profound influence that Russia exerts on the decision-making process in Belgrade or Sarajevo. Everybody understands why Viktor Yanukovych was ousted from Kiev because of his mixed feelings about the future of Ukraine being a member of the NATO or a member of the European Union. The same might be applied to the current situation in Serbia. Now, if politicians in Serbia decide to opt for a membership of the European Union, Moscow would of course have good reasons to feel concerned. Now, do you think Moscow certainly would not support the bid by Serbia to be a member of the European Union, to say nothing of the future of becoming a member of the NATO, right?
Well, NATO membership, yes, that would make Russia really unhappy. For Serbia, European Union, much less so. It's not. Ukraine is very different from the Moscow point of view than Belgrade. Ukrainian moving to the West, even to European Union, was seen as a grave national security basic threat, is still seen, and that's a no-no. For Serbia, which is strategically that much less important from the Moscow point of view, European Union membership is seen as, well, that's okay, if it's not followed by NATO membership. But even NATO membership, like Russia protested Montenegro becoming just recently a NATO member, but didn't go berserk about it like with Ukraine, because, well, Montenegro is far away. Russia has economic, other interests there, but they are not as profound as in Ukraine.
We understand that very well. Thank you, Pavel, for being with us. After all, President Putin has drawn a red line for the neighboring countries to be too close to NATO. The absolute security of one country means the absolute insecurity for others. That's what Brzezinski said in his description of the ambition of Moscow. That's part of the legacy of the Cold War. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.